Go ahead and look back. So, what we are going to be going over today is our second week of Mobility Matters. So, just as a recap, Mobility Matters in the past has been recovery for results. So, we kind of revamped it a little bit, but it is still focused on mobility and recovery. So last week, Brooke started out this program by discussing mobilization specifically. Today, we're still going to be talking about mobility, but we're going to be focusing on muscular activation and how that relates to mobility and functional movement. And today, Stephanie Brunson, our ergonomic specialist, is also on the call, and she's going to be discussing posture and the influence of ergonomics on movement patterns. So, got a lot of good stuff. So, if you don't know me already, my name is Stefan. I'm the program manager here in Fort Collins. And so I'm super excited to be going over this topic with y'all today. A lot of my background is in functional strength training and corrective exercise. And so this is right alongside my passion. So, very excited to be going over it. So, I'll go ahead and let Stephanie hop on and introduce herself to you guys.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Stephanie Brunson, if we haven't met already, and I am the ergonomic consultant for our US population here at HPE. And I'm happy to be presenting today with Stefan. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. So, a little bit that we're going to be going over, I kind of discussed at the beginning, but a look at what we're going to be talking about mobilization, activation, what is their relationship? How are they connected? Also, we're going to be going over some common underactive muscles that you may see pop up in your daily lives and the compensation patterns that go alongside that. And then we will have Stephanie hopping on for ergonomics and posture. And then we will get up and get moving because if we're talking about activation, we want to get up and actually be active for a little bit. So we'll go ahead and start off by talking about mobility and activation. So what does activation actually have to do with mobility anyways? A lot of people think of activation as muscular strength, and then on the other side of the spectrum, they think of mobility as just stretching and flexibility. So just a little bit of a recap from last week. Brooke went over the difference in flexibility and mobility. So as you can see, flexibility is the ability of a muscle to lengthen passively through a range of motion, and mobility is the ability of a joint to move actively through a range of motion, both freely and easily. So, while it's important to have a large enough range of motion to move through different patterns, the motion itself is going to come directly from our own muscles being able to readily move us. And so, once we look at activation, a lot of times you're going to hear the terms muscular strength and activation used interchangeably, but there is a difference between the two. Most of the time, whenever the focus is on mobility, we're going to be talking about activation, not just muscular strength. So, if you look at the definitions here, muscular strength is the maximal capacity of a muscle or a group of muscles to exert force. So, this is basically what we think of whenever we think of strength training, resistance training. It's able to produce that max force or to be able to move more weight. But activation is the ability of a muscle to receive and respond to neurological stimuli in order to contract. Basically, what this means is it's just the ability of our body to tell our muscle to contract, to be used, whether we're in a movement or if we're at rest in order to hold our posture. And so that is a lot less about how much weight we can move and a lot more about that mind to muscle connection. So you might have heard that phrase used before, mind to muscle connection. That's basically just a way of letting us know that we can actually train our brain to activate a muscle that might not be used to being used if we practice it enough. So why is it even important? Why do we want to activate certain muscles? Well, we have a lot of muscles in our body and they all have a specific purpose. And you can really start to see a domino effect form whenever you have certain muscles that aren't able to perform because they're not being activated. Whenever one muscle is underactive, a lot of other muscles have to take on extra stress in order to complete desired movements. This can cause tightness, pain, a shortened range of motion in those muscles because they're not used to taking on all that extra stress. This can also cause joint and movement dysfunctions that are going to lead to more muscle compensations in other regions of the body. So, just for example of kind of what this is talking about, what this means. Before I was here with Health Fitness HPE, I had a client in the past came in and he was experiencing neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, and he had a pretty obvious shoulder drop. And so we knew what was causing that pain. But once we did a thorough assessment, what we realized is whenever he was younger, he was in an accident and he had hurt his ankle. It had limited the range of motion in his ankle. He had had to compensate because he wasn't able to put a lot of weight on there, had developed a foot drop. And because of that, the compensations to the muscular imbalances actually worked their way up from the ankle to the knee to the hips to the back and then ultimately to the shoulders. So once we took a deeper look, we realized, what can happen if we don't really pay attention to certain things. And that's an extreme example. Don't worry about that if you have just everyday tightness from sitting for longer periods of time. But it is important to think about that whenever we are looking at the importance of activating certain muscles. Now, whenever we are completing these activation movements, a lot of them aren't going to be large movements with heavy weights. This is because we want to be more focused on increasing the body's ability to tell that muscle to contract. So it might be a little bit different than what you've seen with strength training in the past. Now let's talk about a few of the common underactive muscles that we might see and some compensations that they can cause. So, one of the most common and consequential muscles that are found to be underactive in a lot of individuals is the glute muscles. And right now, I'm talking specifically about the gluteus maximus, which is pretty much what most of us think of whenever we think of the large glute muscles that are, controlling our hips and that tilt that we have in there. So due to a large amount of time sitting during the day, as well as like bad movement patterns and habits, these muscles can become underactive, and then that's going to lead to that anterior pelvic tilt. So last week, Brooke discussed anterior pelvic tilt, and she talked about the overactive muscles that are associated with it. So the underactive muscles that can lead to this include, like I said, the gluteus maximus, and also the abdominal muscles and as well as your core in general. And so underactivity of these muscles, it can lead to a tight erector spinae muscles in the lower back that can cause back pain. There is an increased risk of back or hip injury whenever we are running or strength training because of this. And then also, the glutes are very important for the glutes are also very important for running, as well as our foot strike. And so, because of this, if we have an improper foot strike whenever we run, because we're not activating those glutes, it can cause pain in the knees and the ankles as well. So that's important to remember. I just saw a chat on here that's asking if there was a recording for last week. I do believe that there is one. If I'm wrong, one of y'all can correct me. But I believe that it was put in the chat, and then it should also be on our YouTube page as well. Awesome. Thanks for that answer. Thanks for helping out there. All right. So, while a lot of you already know the importance of the glutes, because we do talk about that quite a bit, you may only be thinking about the gluteus maximus, but one crucial muscle of the hip that's going to help stabilize during movement as well as support hip abduction is the gluteus medius. So if you look at this picture here, the gluteus maximus is that larger muscle. It is labeled with the name and then the letter B. If you look right above it and slightly laterally or to the side, you'll see the gluteus medius labeled A. So that's where it is. It's very close to what we would naturally consider the glutes. It's commonly confused with the TFL or the piriformis because they're nearby. But underactivity of this muscle, it can lead to TFL and IT band tightness or pain. That's because if it's not doing its job of abduction, then these muscles are going to take over, and they're not very big muscles. They weren't designed to take on all that stress. It can also cause underactivity of it can also cause internal rotation of the legs and lead to knee valgus. And knee valgus is basically just a buckling of the knees inward. And so you'll see this exacerbated whenever people are going into a squatting motion. If those knees buckle together whenever you squat, that's considered knee valgus. If we are in a constant stance with those knees buckling in because of that underactivity, then it can increase our risk of ACL, lateral meniscus injuries whenever we are active. So it's important to remember that. Because the glute med supports hip abduction, underactivity can lead to a hip drop whenever we're walking or running, and that can just cause some excess tightness, pain in the hips over time as well. So it's a muscle we don't hear about very often, but it is very, very important. And also last week, Brooke discussed upper cross syndrome and the overactive muscles that are associated with that. So, as a reminder, the this imbalance is going to be characterized by that raising and that rounding of the shoulders. It can also be characterized by a jutting forward of the head and the neck. So we know the overactive muscles that are involved with that. Some of the underactive muscles that are involved in this compensation include the lower trapezius, the rhomboids, and the deep cervical flexors. So this picture here shows a reference of the trapezius muscle, a fairly large muscle in the back. And what we are discussing being underactive is this area between and below the shoulder blades that you can also see in the picture. So that is what we are trying to activate, as well as up in the neck are deep cervical flexors. So results of chronically sitting or moving in this position, it's going to cause pain in the neck, the head, the back, or the shoulders. And then it can cause poor movement patterns, which is just going to lead to more compensations. So now I'm going to go ahead and let Stephanie jump in and she can talk to you about some ways that you can be proactive at your workstation to hopefully avoid some of these things that we've been talking about.
Awesome. Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everyone. So Stefan did a great job of explaining some of the syndromes that happen in our lower body and upper body. And it's one of the things that I commonly see in my line of work here, working in ergonomics. And so one of the things that I like to do is just remind all of us what is our posture supposed to look like when we're seated and standing. So if you're seated here with me today, I want you to kind of go through this little checklist on your own. So if you're seated in your chair, make sure that your feet are flat on the floor. And then once your feet are flat on the floor, make sure you're scooted all the way back into your chair. Once you're all the way back into your chair, um, you're going to make sure that you have some lumbar support. So a lot of times we'll have a little bar that's on our chair that we can lift up or down. And so once you have adjusted that lumbar support to support that lower curve in your spine, you're going to make sure that your shoulders are also back in your chair and you're not leaning forward. Once you have those shoulders back, make sure that your hands are properly aligned on your keyboard and that they're not too high or too low, that your elbows are at a nice 90-degree angle. And then when you're looking at the top edge of your screen, make sure that your chin is also parallel to the floor. So that is what we consider neutral posture in our seated workstation. A lot of times what happens though is once we're seated, we kind of let our abdominals get lazy and our glutes definitely turn off while we're seated. So when you're seated, I want you to think about using the muscles that wrap around your spine like a belt. And so we want to activate those muscles. We're not tightening them so tight that we can't breathe, but they're also not so loose that we're slouching in our chair. Okay. Now, when we move to our standing posture, which we should be moving from our seat every 20 minutes into a standing posture. And once we're there, everything in the upper body stays the same. We want to make sure that the lower body actually gets active again. So again, those glutes turn off when we're seated, but when we stand up, we want to make sure that the glutes have been activated along with those abdominal muscles. Now, you can take a little bit wider stance when you're standing, and you can also use your footrest and prop one foot at a time while you're in a standing position. So this is what we consider neutral posture, and it's the position where we have the least amount of pressure throughout the body on our spine while we're working at a workstation. All right, so next slide is going to be talking again about those upper cross and lower cross syndromes. So these are the things that I typically see when people come to me because they're feeling discomfort. So we have that rounding forward that happens when we're leaning out and away from our chair. And so when we're there for longer periods of time, we start to develop weak muscles and those tight muscles. And you can kind of see this actual cross that happens in the body with some of those tight muscles and then the weaker muscles as well. And then again in the glutes, especially when we're in that seated position, they kind of turn off, is what we say, or they get a little lazy. So when we're seated, often we'll have weaker abdominals and weaker glute maximus. And then our hip flexors will actually get tight, and then we'll have some lower back tightness as well that comes into play. So our fitness center is great about helping to address and identify those and give you the tools to work through some of those weaknesses and tightnesses that might be in the body that have developed after a long period of time. Next one that I really like to talk about is our sleep posture. When we are sleeping, that is 8 hours of staying in a position. And sleep is so essential and important for our recovery and for how we feel the next day as well. So when we're sleeping, we want to actually think about maintaining that same almost standing posture that we just addressed and identified earlier, but in a parallel position. So the best way to sleep is actually on your back. And once you're on your back, you want to place a little pillow beneath the knees. And that little pillow beneath the knees actually helps to reduce some of that low back strain, just like if we were to take one foot and place it on a footrest in that standing position, right? So once we have that pillow underneath the knees, our low back is nice and relaxed, shoulders rolled back, and laying with the arms out to the side. And then we want to think about supporting the natural curve of our cervical spine or our neck. So our pillow should not be so big that our chin drops down to our chest, right? And our pillow should not be um, almost non-existent so that the curve of the cervical spine is not supported. So we want to think about a supportive spine to maintain a neutral curve. And then if you are a side sleeper, you want to think about the pillow between the knees. That's right. So when we're sleeping on our side, pillow between the knees, and actually, if you want to put a pillow underneath your elbow and your hand to support that shoulder. And again, back sleeper, pillow underneath the knees. Last thing that I like to remind people of is that when they get out of bed, when you get out of bed, you want to roll over onto your side and then shoot up out of bed. So sometimes that alarm clock goes off and you pop out of bed. I like to call it the Frankenstein. You just kind of swing your body up. But when you've been sleeping for a long period of time in one position, that maybe is a little stiff, those muscles are a little tight. We want to give our body a chance to kind of slowly wake up and greet the day. Um, so the next slide is just some tips and resources for ergonomics in regards to your posture. We want to make sure we're increasing those break cycles. So sitting for no longer than 20 minutes at a time. After that 20 minutes is up, try and move. Um, Stand for 8 minutes, move for 2 minutes. I like to try and move for just that full 10 minutes if you can. And incorporate some of the mobilization activation techniques that you're learning during this seminar. I also included here a link to the Think chair, which is the chair that's on site, and that can help with uh, adjustments. So making sure that your chair is properly adjusted to you. And then if you think you need to take a risk assessment or an ergonomics evaluation, you can just email me and we can get started there. Thanks.
The mic was off. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing with us. That's super important information for all of us to remember, even me right now, as I am sitting and I looked at the clock. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes now. So, according to what we just went over, it is time to get up. So, we're going to go ahead and get moving and start to activate a few of those muscles that we were just talking about. So, feel free to watch, just take in that information if you want to. But if you have time and you also have space nearby, then feel free to get up, get on the ground, and do a few of these movements with me. So, we will go ahead and get started. And I'm going to get up. I've got a mat down on the ground already. And what I'm going to be using for today, I'm going to be doing a couple different options of the same exercises. So, what I'm going to have us start out with is working our glutes. So, if you remember, some of the muscles that we talked about specifically today was the gluteus maximus, the gluteus medius, and then we also talked about some of these muscles in our mid to lower trapezius and deep to that can cause that rounding of the shoulders. So, we are going to address each one of those. So what I'm going to have us start out with is the glutes. So what we would do in this scenario, one option is you can go down onto your back. We're going to have our feet placed into the ground. And then from there, we're going to go into glute bridges. So whenever we go into glute bridges, what we want to focus on is tightening our core, and then we want to squeeze our glutes. So the main majority of this movement, we want to be glute dominant and not quad dominant. So we want to think of driving these hips upward by squeezing our glutes, not just by driving our heels into the ground. Now, one thing that you can do to isolate the glutes a little bit more, and also if you have a little bit of a problem with accidentally going quad dominant on this exercise, you can pick your toes up off the ground, drive the heels into the ground, and then again, we are thinking of driving our hips upward by squeezing our glutes. And then you want to make sure that you lock out at the top. So over time, you might want to do a little bit of a mental check to make sure that you're completely locking out those hips at the top. So another option that you can do with this is we did talk about the glute medius. And one way to activate this with the exact same exercise, as well as some other abductors in our hips, you can place a band around your legs right above your knees. And then we're going to go right back down into our glute bridge. And then from there, you want to actively be pressing those knees around the band, against the band. That way, you're not letting the band drive those knees together. All right, we want that nice neutral position that we started out with doing our glute bridge. So another exercise that we are going to move on to, we are going to get down into a clamp. So the way that you can do this is by lying down at your side a couple different ways. You can either have your arm outstretched underneath you, or you can bring your forearm up onto the floor. You just want to make sure that you've got a line between your shoulders, your hips, and your ankles. And then from here, we're going to keep a neutral position in our torso and our hips, and we're pulling that knee away from the ground. So we're abducting that knee away from our hips. You want to make sure that you keep the core active as you do this. So right now I have a band around that's increasing the resistance that I'm using. You can use a band if you need it. And if you're not quite there yet, and we're just working on that base level activation, you don't have to have the band there either. And again, you can place that arm underneath you. You're going to want to make sure to do the same thing on both sides. That way you can have those balanced results that we were talking about. I'll go ahead and take the band off. Last exercise that we're going to go over today, we're going to be doing floor slides. So what we could do with floor slides, this is going to activate the mid to lower trapezius muscle. And so you can lay down flat on the ground. You want to start out by activating that core, so you press the small of your back into the ground. We don't want to have an arch in our back for this. Once you get in that position, you can bring your arms up into a goalpost position. So whenever we start out, you want the back of your hands as well as your elbows driving down into the ground. And then what we're going to do from there is activate our core. We want to drive our arms down. It's okay if your hands raise up off the ground, but we want to keep our elbows locked down onto the floor. And then you can return to position. Now, whenever you return back to position, you want to make sure that you keep the small of your back in the ground, and you want to make sure that you don't depress those shoulders. So you don't want those shoulders to drop back down to let you to return to your original position. You want to keep those shoulders tight, and you want to actively think about driving your shoulders and your elbows back and down into the ground. So this is not a very big movement, but you'll notice over time, keeping with these mental checks of making sure that the small of your back is in the ground, your core is activated, your shoulders and your elbows stay in contact with the ground, you're really going to be tiring out that trapezius muscle that we're trying to hit. So that's a few different examples that you can do. But there are many, many more examples for each one of these muscles that we talked about today that you can reference on the guide that you were given. All of those are going to have YouTube links that you can go to. So that is about all the time that we have today. So thank you so much for joining us today. Had a great time going over this. And like I said at the beginning, this is what I'm passionate about. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask now, or you can email me, ask in the chat after this. I would be happy to answer the best I can. So I noticed a few chats going on while I was down on the floor. So I'm going to read through this, make sure that there weren't any answers or any questions that need to be answered. But luckily, it looks like Kimber and Brooke and some others are already on it. So thank you guys so much. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.